So let's continue this series on the best companies in each sector, and this time we'll go with the materials sector, which was the most requested from the last video. So what sort of companies make up the materials sector? Well, obviously the most common and the ones that you'll probably think of the first are mining companies, but that's not the only sorts of companies that come in this sector. We also have companies that produce chemicals and construction material. There's also paper and packaging companies included in this as well. So materials that people need or companies need to build other products. So mining and materials basically. So the three biggest companies in this sector are BHP, Fortescue Metals and Rio Tinto. As you probably already know, they're all big mining companies. But let's get into which are the best dividend companies within this sector and which are the best growth companies within this sector. Now, I'll be using financial information only, and while they're not my recommendations, I'm just showing you the data. We can go through and see which companies do have the best dividends and the most consistency, and which companies have shown really good growth, but also that management is really good at managing the money within the company. So we'll look at return on equity as well for those growth companies. So I've picked 3 in each category based on the financials. Let's jump into the computer and see which ones came out on top.
So there are 808 companies within the materials sector, and 50 of them have a market capitalization over 1 billion. So that's 50 companies that have a market capitalization of over 1 billion. We'll grab these and put these in a spreadsheet. So I put them all in a spreadsheet and I've already filled out the data. So let's go and look at dividend yield first. So sorted by dividend yield, the 3 highest dividend yield companies are Fortescue Metals, Zimplats and Rio. And they're all consistent, so let's look at those in more detail. So Fortescue Metals has a dividend yield of 13.6%. The dividends are consistent. There's a 5-year return on the price of 259.92% and a low debt to equity of only 35.2%. For Zimplats, the dividend yield is 13.2% currently. Again, the dividend payout is consistent. The 5-year return on the price for Zimplats was 504.39%, and they have no debt. Rio Tinto, dividend yield 10.6%, consistent again, and 42.15% for their 5-year return, and low debt to equity, 26.4%. So let's look at those in more detail. So Fortescue Metals is the 4th largest producer of iron ore in the world, and interesting fact, they also have their own private railway to transport the iron ore, and they're located in Western Australia, and they pay their dividends in March and September. And so as you can see over here, the dividends are nice and consistent, and so is the growth. Zimplats has a main production of platinum metals, although it does also produce some other metals on a smaller scale, such as gold, nickel, and some others, and their mines are located in Zimbabwe. And the dividends are paid in March and September. Again, consistent dividend payout, and the graph looks nice and steady. And finally, we have Rio Tinto. It's a mining company that operates in 35 countries around the world, and the 4 main products that they have is aluminium, copper, minerals, and iron ore, and they pay dividends in April and September. The dividends are nice and consistent and growing. The price graph is a little bit more volatile than the other 2, but it has increased in price over the last 5 years. So looking for high growth companies is a little bit more complicated than just looking at the dividend yields. So I was mainly looking at the 5-year return and the return on equity. It had to have a return on equity over 15%, and that return on equity has to be fairly stable over the last few years, and of course low debt. So the companies that I ended up choosing were Zimplats, Champion Iron and Perseus. So let's go and look at those in more detail. Now looking at the growth stocks, CIA Champion Iron has a 5-year return on price, 417.65%. The return on equity is a really high 46.5%. They've got low debt, and they do pay dividends as well. So I've put the dividends in here, even though that's not quite as important for growth stocks. They pay 4.2% as dividend yield. Perseus Mining has a 5-year return of 372.86%. Their return on equity is 15.9%. Really low debt, 5.9%, and they also pay dividends of 6%. And then we have Zimplats, which is also in the dividend stocks, 5-year return of 504.39%, return on equity 18.7%, no debt, and a high dividend yield of 13.2%. So Champion Iron, as the name suggests, is a product. They produce iron ore, and their mine is in Quebec, Canada. As you can see, the graph is nice and steady. They did have a dip at the end of 2021, but the return on equity is nice and stable and very high. Perseus Mining is focused mainly on gold, and their mines are located in Africa. Their graph is beautiful and growing long term on a steady upswing, and the return on equity over the last 3 years has been really strong, and it's now over 15%, which is very good. And Zimplats we already know, and we've already seen the graph, but here's the return on equity. Again, nice and high, still over 15%, even though it's dipped slightly in 2022, but still over 15% at 18.7%. So there you go.
So based on the financials, those 5 companies are what I would consider the best of this sector. What you would do from here is then put them maybe on a watch list and go and do more research on them. But those are the ones that had, for dividend stock, the best dividend yield and consistency, and for growth stocks, the best past performance. Although we do know that past performance is no guarantee of future performance. So keep that in mind. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and which sector are we going to do next? Happy investing.